So we have the opportunity both now to, let's say, ask a direct question if there's something that came up to these for these two sessions of presenters, or to open the floor, open up for some general discussion based on what we heard this morning and based on the questions that we posed ourselves in terms of what we would like to get out of this session. Floor is open for discussions. Shall?
Thank you. Do you hear me now? Thank you very much for an excellent presentation, and I thought especially the last presentation focusing on measuring impact and results is critical to evaluation. I still have an impression that these evaluations focus on, let's say, organization, internal processes. To what extent did the organization fulfill its mandate? But that doesn't tell us whether it had any impact. How do we measure impact? It's to grapple with impact of any intervention in society is extremely difficult, and we all grapple with that question, of course. One could have also the situation that the country improved, not because the organization was effective, but in spite of effective organizational work. You had the situation in southern Sudan where the Norwegian church aid was extremely effective, but the society around it came to a halt because all the good manpower worked for the NCA in the end, and the only project that the NCA felt that they failed was the agricultural project, and they shut it down. But after 10 years, they found out that all the local farmers had stolen their crops and grew them successfully. So to understand and what is the impact is very difficult. And that comes to the question, does an evaluation build on the paradigm of the organization itself? Shouldn't an evaluation rather also have alternative thinkers or alternative people that think in different paradigms? And maybe the evaluation teams should be more robust and be set over a much broader scale, including local participants. So so that is my question.
Thank you very much. Two, I think, very important and very challenging questions. I'm going to take a couple of questions. I recognize Beata and then Berit. If anybody else, please indicate to me. Beata.
Thank you for very interesting presentations the whole day. I have 3 questions. One is just to the last one, Peacebuilding Support Office. I just wondered whether you could just say something about staff, how are you organized, and the budget, just to have an idea. And then also who implements your projects, only UN or also NGOs? And then I was wondering also, when you looked at the 30% of success rate, the other 70%, did you find any, harm? Did you analyze the harms that might have caused unintendedly by the project? To OIOS.
I must now step in with my advisory group responsibility and say it was 30% for significant.
Significant,
not
sorry,
not
okay.
30% success rate,
no,
but programs that have significantly demonstrated that they have a peacebuilding effect.
Very important precision, thank you.
Sorry.
And then there was a question to OIOS on the finding of the DDR projects and challenges, which I see in all other evaluations of working with DDR. And did you also analyze or look into the reasons why, and what do you do or what did you recommend in terms of how to address this challenge in the future? And then I also wonder whether your published reports, are they available on your website? They are. Excellent. So for everybody to know. Lastly, in terms of capacity building, is a finding in the UNDP evaluation and in many other evaluations that the focus tend to be on individuals in institutions and not the institutional frame, not taking the institutional frame conditions into account. How to improve this? And I know also this is in the conjunction of, in the cooperation between the peacekeeping operations and UNDP. This is and other UN agencies. This is a huge issue. Thanks.
Thank you very much. And then Berit.
Thank you very much. Berit Pladby, Policy Director for UN Development Activities in the Ministry's Department of, what is it?
UN Affairs?
UN Peace and Humanitarian Affairs. It's very long, that's why. I would like to pick up on this issue about measuring impact, which my colleague from the ministry also mentioned earlier, and what was said in the presentations we heard after the coffee break on moving from evaluating activities to moving to measuring, reporting, and evaluating outcomes. What we are interested in, of course, is both to learn about what is done to measure transformational change, or the UN's contribution to transformational change, but of course also whether that contribution to transformational change actually is achieved. And that brings me to two issues which were dwelt on before the coffee break. The joint conflict analysis of the wider UN family. But it's one other aspect which I would guess is very important if we are able to assess and ascertain that the UN or the wider UN family contribute to transformational change. That is the link between the contextual analysis and the conflict analysis. So if I could hear the views of the presentators on this issue, I would very much appreciate that. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Berit. I'm going to ask any of the presenters who would like to comment on these questions to do so. We would very much like to go for a second round of questions as well, so please try to keep your contributions and your comments as short as possible. Any of the presenters who would like to respond to any of the questions raised? Start, Stefan, please. You can just use that microphone.
Okay.
This one. Just use this one.
Okay, thanks. I would like to start with the first question and the last question, because they relate to each other on the measurements of results or impact. You used the term impact. I think we are very clearly focused on changes reflecting outcomes in terms of institutional or individual or behavioral changes of key actors which are targeted by the project intervention. In this regard, we are really limiting the measurements on a medium term and not long term, and trying to see how this is attributable to PBF intervention. I was mentioning before this clear statement from several external evaluations: if we are fast enough to get into areas which are too risk-taking and too sensitive taken over by others, these changes which we can achieve with our project are more or less attributable, even if in a limited way, but attributable to PBF interventions. So this is an important statement which was done by several independent evaluation findings. But it's very clear that measuring these outcomes needs to be linked to the conflict analysis. So that's the internal conclusion of our findings. Only focused on target achievements is simply not enough. We want to see if these changes were really triggering, were really undermining existing conflict dynamics, which is difficult to make at the current stage if there's no conflict analysis done upfront before we start. So in this regard, there is definitely a gray area to see to what extent were we able to go so far and weakening conflict dynamics within the local context where our projects are working. But overall, what I want to highlight is that evaluation at the only data source is not enough. That is why we really try to triangulate external views, technical reviews, which we are conducting in parallel, for example, on thematic areas like DDR or social sector reform or public administration and their quality of service delivery within the conflict context as additional data sources to get a broader picture. So we are really using for these performance assessments figures which I showed in the table. They are not only related to the evaluations as one data source. No, they are really combining different data sources to be more sure, to have a broader view on that, what we achieved.
Thank you very much, Stefan. I think that's very good points. Janice? Jan?
Thank you. I might follow up on that, and Emily will add anything that she can that I miss. On the question of impact and outcome evaluation, I think everyone recognises that this is a useful direction to try and go in. It's actually a critical direction to try and go in. One of the reasons why probably we haven't in the past so much is that our mandate in our organisation relates largely to accountability. We're part of an oversight entity. We are reporting to the General Assembly on the extent to which the mandates they have given peacekeeping operations and other policies are achieving the objectives that they were given. That's slightly different to impact. Having said that, there is a focus in our organisation and in the United Nations more generally through the United Nations Evaluation Group to look at how impact evaluation can be done better, and guidance is now being issued on that, and I think everyone is looking very hard at how to do it better. One of the issues we face is that, you know, it's this old question of attribution. You know, it's very difficult to look at to understand exactly what contribution a particular program or entity has made to an outcome that is the net product of a multitude of external actors and external factors. That's difficult. Also, I think in looking at impacts, where we have done it, it's actually quite short-term impacts, and often it's the sustainability of those impacts that we're ultimately interested in, and that makes it a particularly difficult exercise.
Thank you very
Emily
much.
pointed out that we have just 2 people working on this and at Chief, so it's quite hard. Just quickly on DDR, I don't want to talk directly to DDR because neither of us worked on that project at the time, but perhaps we can talk a little later. And as Beata asked, our documents are available, and I'll circulate a list later of where they can be found.
Sure. The only thing I would add is the role of the political factors, because often the missions are given a supporting role, so that actually really makes the contribution and attribution aspect really, really difficult for us. So we try to focus in on what the mission was actually assigned to do and whether they're achieving those results.
Anyone else from the presenters? Excellent. Let's go on to the second group of questions. I have Yarmund, Marina, and Alan. Anyone else? Okay. Yarmund?
You mean answer the first round, or is this?
We've moved on to from the first round to the second round now, Stan. So if you could keep the comment you wanted to make then to the response to the second round. Okay, thank you very much. Sorry if I'm moving a bit quickly, but we have a time frame factor. Thanks, Yarmund.
Yeah, thank you. One question, one comment. First of all, maybe to all of you, how do you see the role of evaluations in the bigger picture of result reporting? Maybe I'm mistaken, but sometimes I have the impression that maybe some donors are a bit too much focused on result matrix and maybe too little focus on evaluations. And that's the first question. Second comment, particularly on Stefan's presentation. I also think 30%, yeah, that sounds okay with me. But if you expect like 80%, I think that takes us back to the introduction and the comments by Cedric, then your expectations are wildly too high, especially when you are operating in a very risky environment and you're supposed to do it speedily. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Marina.
Good morning. My name is Marina Caparini. I'm from the Norwegian Institute of International Affairs. And I have a question for Janice and Emily from OIOS. I was really struck by your findings across various missions about the poor results of security sector reform and rule of law. And I was wondering if you could explain some reasons for those findings. And because your mandate really is about accountability, I was wondering also if you could comment about how this plays out internally. That is, how do you translate poor results in security sector reform within the UN across these various agencies, DPKO, UNDP, other agencies that have a role in providing some aspect of security sector reform, and how you think those mechanisms could be improved?
Perhaps I can just add to that question to say it's something that came to my mind as well. If you can explain to us better the link between your evaluations and then the action that is taken by the UN. I mean, obviously it's not your responsibility, but you can say a bit more about what is being done to make sure that the different responsible departments actually act upon those actions. And you mentioned tracking before. Then we have Ellen here as the last question for the second round, and then we'll open up for a last set of responses. Shell, did you have a question or was it a comment? Okay. Alan?
I'm feeling a bit schizophrenic because I have 3 questions and 3 comments response. But let me go to the questions relating to the 2 presentations here. And it may be a question that can be directly responded to, or it may be something that's a challenge for us to move on jointly or separately in the future, because it reflects some issues that have come up in our evaluations as well. First of all, in terms of Emily and Janice and OIOS's evaluations, they're one of the issues that we've been trying to take a look at ourselves is to what degree is there a process or a thought process behind the wind down of integrated missions, and the extent to which there's a transfer of responsibilities and transfer of expectations. And I know there are great difficulties in that, and we're sitting here, looking at Afghanistan and other places where it's difficult to know where the integrated mission is actually going to move to, when does it wind down, how is it going to operate. But whether any of your evaluations are actually taking a look at this transfer of responsibility roles at the end of integrated missions would be very interesting for us. The other part that came up quite frequently for us, and perhaps it's been an issue that you've also looked at, is the extent to which humanitarian coordination should be within or outside of the political process within integrated missions. Because very often we have World Food Programme, and we have other humanitarian parts of UN activities, suggesting that the political process actually ties them down and makes it difficult for them to meet their mandate, and therefore they should be outside of the integrated mission. And I know we've had both examples of integrated missions where the humanitarian coordination is external to the political process and also within. So whether you've ever had an opportunity to look at the differences and could reflect on it, that would be, I think, quite interesting for us. The other thing that appealed to me in Stephen's presentation was when we start talking about 30% of projects as having contributed significantly. One of the things that we are trying to look at, and perhaps you're taking into consideration, is to what degree are we leaving room for risk and innovation, and do we have an appetite for failure in order to identify new and innovative strategies? Because sometimes results-based approaches take us to a risk-averse. We always want to maximize to have 80% approval or 80% achievement, and maybe what we really need to do is be willing to accept 30% because we are taking new and innovative strategies. So to what degree is the Peacebuilding Office actually trying to look at innovation as part of the factors for risk?
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. I'm going to ask Stan to start off with the last round of responses.
I'll actually talk about a question I think that Berit raised with regard to linking conflict analysis to context analysis. As we were discussing during the coffee break, you can learn a lot about the causes of conflict. There's lots of studies out there that look at specific conflicts and tell you the origins and everything else. But the point at which you move forward and say, okay, this is what I'm going to do about it, does require then that you do a much sort of deeper context analysis. And that involves lots of things. You're thinking about how the positioning is happening, who is who in the society, the power brokers and everybody else, the risk analysis and different types of risk in that context. And that has to be part of the analysis that you do. So just one example of a recent policy process in the UN, which is the one linked to public administration in post-conflict settings. And after the entire lessons learned study was done, one key point of what was retained as key for moving forward is for the UN to actually start to treat post-conflict public administration as an integral part of the peace process. It's not just a technical exercise. And that approach to it alone actually created a sort of a new reflection on how you start to address issues of public administration in post-conflict settings. Because if it was only being addressed as a technical issue, we completely missed the point. And those lessons have shown that. So that context analysis tells you that you're not just dealing with technical exercise, and so you're not just trying to create technical structures, but that what you are actually investing in is going to determine how the peace process actually plays out. So that's the kind of link that we have. And the guidance, the UN, the joint guidance note on capacity building in post-conflict settings covers all of those principles that we intend to take forward. Thanks.
Thank you very much. We've basically come to the end, but if anybody would like to make a last comment for another minute or two, I think we can probably do that. Anybody else would like to take this chance before we forever hold your peace? Stefan?
Thanks so much. Coming back very briefly on these 30% and the failure related to the risk-taking, I'm absolute positive on that, but unfortunately we don't have a policy in place for the UN where teams are rewarded when they are reporting on their own failure. There we need still some time and better understanding on the senior management level to move these forward. But to be able to improve, we need to know why projects are underperforming. In this regard, I think we still know too little. We have now a first glance on outcome achievement, but to know exactly and be able to draw lessons learned within the context, why was this now achieved or not, needs as a precondition substance of reporting, where we get then kind of highlights and insights how we can do it better in the same context. But thanks again for encouraging us to report on failure.
Jan and Emily, there was specific questions asked to you by Alan. Would you respond to that?
Thank you.
Just consulting on that.
Thank you.
Or do we leave those for the UN evaluation group?
Okay. We had a number of questions here. I might just start with Marina's first question, which related to security sector reform and the fact that we've often noted poor results there. In fact, what we've noted is slow results there, I guess, more than non-achievement. And we've recognised, as I think everybody must, that it is a very slow process achieving security sector reform. There are so many elements involved in getting rule of law and security sector reform functioning well in a country that has been very damaged by conflict and may never have had good institutions in the first place. Any weak link is going to undermine progress made in others, at least temporarily. So it takes a long time to get to the critical mass of having things functioning together. I think it's a question of capacity building as well, and capacity building takes time, and that's one of the things the UN is very committed to doing in most peacekeeping operations. And clearly there's a question of political will and ability as well. And we've noted on occasion that there hasn't been an equal partnership always between the UN peacekeeping operation and elements within the national government in terms of making progress in security sector reform. Someone also, Alan asked about exit strategies, about wind down of missions and handing over responsibilities. I think this is something DPKO is putting a lot more emphasis on having staged withdrawals and planned wind downs, and I think the recent wind down of the mission in Timor-Leste was a good example of how they had planned for that in advance and made it happen in an apparently very orderly and successful way. We have noted in the past that exit strategies either don't exist or aren't well articulated, and that includes the handover to other elements of the UN, because typically in integrated peacekeeping missions there is a counterpart unit for many of the other UN entities that are already operating in the country. So they're already operating, we hope, hand in hand, and but the handover needs to be well planned. Clearly there are issues there. Sometimes exit strategies are linked to the achievement of particular benchmarks, as in the DRC, and where those benchmarks aren't being achieved, then the exit strategy is to just wait until it is, and that's clearly a matter that makes it difficult to plan. However, we haven't specifically evaluated, and I'm not sure that anybody has, the efficiency and effectiveness of handover mechanisms in these circumstances. Perhaps it is something that would be worth looking at now that we've had enough missions and enough time to observe a range of these things happening. Emily.
Great, and maybe I'll address the recommendation tracking. We probably didn't cover it thoroughly in the presentation, but it is quite a process that's involved, and it isn't involving just ourselves and one actor from the evaluand. It's usually DPKO, DFS, and the missions, as well as several people on our sides. And when we engage to find out what they've actually been underdoing for the implementation, we actually want to have a dialogue with them. We want to hear what they have to say. We want to be able to verify. We also want to make sure what they've done actually was what we had in mind with the recommendation in terms of, trying to get towards that outcome that we were suggesting needed some assistance. And also one thing that does sort of encourage a little bit of that is in the senior management compacts that the USGs have with the Secretary General. They actually have a figure in there about implementation of recommendations from OIOS. So they're very engaged to know that they need to have these things implemented. But as I said, we haven't had the opportunity at this point to go back to a mission several years later and see what's happened. Of course, though, missions are time-bound in theory, so that might not actually be achievable in some regards.
Thank you very much, everyone. I think that brings us to the close of our discussion session, and we're going to go then into our closing session. Thank you very much.